We pick up the story where I'm gluing up the end frames that I made in the first part of the video. At this point I'm only gluing together the bottom rail and the middle or seat support rail. I glue up and clamp the frames separately, and then to make sure they're identical I clamp the two together while the glue dries. And a quick check to make sure that they're still square. You saw how I shaped the armrest to fit the back leg, and now it's time to fix it in place. I mark the undersurface with the shape of the top of the leg. I turn the armrest over, and then using the markings as a guide I drill 2 dowel holes, taking care not to drill all the way through. After drilling 2 corresponding holes in the top of the front leg, the arm is dowelled and glued into place. The back end of the armrest fits neatly against the back leg and is secured with glue and a long screw. And the other arm gets glued up in the same way, which means I can now start thinking about the rest of the bench. Some time ago a builder friend of mine gave me several roof joists from an old conservatory he'd been demolishing. I managed to slice these up, and with careful sawing I got several strips out of each one. These strips will make good sturdy slats for the bench seat. I cut 5 of them to the same length. I cut one piece to the length I want, and then I use that as a template to make sure that all the other pieces are exactly the same length. I found a nice piece of straight-grained oak which had been the top of an old, long, low bookcase. I needed several long pieces to run the length of the bench to form the framework of it, and I knew this would look lovely once it was all cleaned up and the brown stain and varnish had all been taken off, but first of all I needed to saw it into strips. This always makes a lot of sawdust, and even though I was in the open air, I decided I'd go and fit the extraction on it to cut down the dust. And here I've cleaned up all the brown strips of the bookshelf, and I'm ready to start the next phase. As an aside, there's an interesting little thing here. It's a Bible bookshelf that came from an old chapel that I picked up recently. It's sort of inch thick, solid elm. It's not terribly well made, but the wood's lovely. I'm sure I'll find a use for it one of these days. Okay, so we've got the two end frames made. I can start putting the rest of the bench together. First of all, I'm just going to offer up the pieces to make sure I've got the right pieces and that it's all roughly going to work. I'm going to make the slats for the back of the seat from the backs of some old dining chairs and some barley twist legs from an old dining table. I've sawn the table legs in half down the length, and now I'm just going to lay them out on the top and bottom rails to see roughly what it's going to look like. As you can see, all the chair slats are still covered in that dark brown varnish stain, and I need to remove that and take it right back to bare wood so that I can make it look the way I want it to look. But that's enough of that, let's move on. All these slats have to be fixed to the top and bottom rails of the backrest, so I need to cut a slot into these rails for the slats to fit into. To do this, I use the routing table. And now we have a nice deep slot along the bottom edge of the top rail. I'll check the depth of that so I know how long to cut the tenons on the end of the slats. I cut the tenons using a tenon saw, which is specifically designed to cut equally well across the grain or down the grain of wood. You can see how the tenon on the end of the slat fits nicely into the groove, and also a tenon on the end of the barley twist slats fits nicely into the groove we made in the top rail. I clamp the top and bottom rail in place using the barley twist slats as spacers, and then slot in all of the plain slats. In that way we can see exactly where we have to cut off the plain slats to the right length. Rather than a slot, the bottom rail has a stepped rebate in it, and you can see we have to cut a little step into the bottom end of each of the slats to suit. And so, having cut them all to length and cut all the rebates and all the tenons, all the pieces fit neatly together to make the back of the bench. As you can see, I have still to take off the brown varnish from the barley twist slats, but I'll do that next. That's a lot of tedious scraping, so I'll draw a veil over the next half hour or so. Having checked that all the pieces fit together, I can now glue them together and make just one single panel for the back. That way, when I come to assemble the bench, I'm just dealing with one flat panel rather than lots of little pieces. I tack a panel pin into the bottom of each slat to hold it into the rebate while the glue sets. And then when the glue's set, I can offer the panel up between the end frames. All the joints will eventually be dowelled and glued and screwed, but for the moment I'm just going to screw them together to make sure it all fits. I use a special counterbore drill bit which drills a pilot hole for the screw and also a larger bore hole to bury the head of the screw inside the wood, which I can then cover up later on with a plug of oak. In addition to the back panel, there'll be another cross rail at seat height front and back of the bench. And now you can see the effect of that counterbore drill bit I was using earlier. All the screw heads are sunk well below the surface of the wood so that I can cover them up later with a little plug of oak. And finally, another rail low down between the bottom rails of the end panels. The top edge of each of the seat supports has a nice curve to give a good shape to the seat, and for additional strength I shall make another support for the middle. As well as the curved shape, the whole seat is tilted very slightly backwards for comfort, and so the ends of the centre support have to be cut at slightly less than 90 degrees to fit properly. And as with the other joints, this is temporarily screwed into place just to make sure it all fits. I'm going to glue this up one end at a time, so I need to make a jig to hold the rails in place while I unscrew one end to do the dowels and glue and screw it all back on again. The jig is just rough pieces of wood screwed together to hold the rails in the right place. Here's a handy trick when you're doing dowel joints. You take a small nail and hold it between the two parts of the joint and then temporarily clamp it up. And when you take it apart again, you'll find that the nail head has left a little impression exactly where you need to drill the dowel hole. I do the same thing on each of the other joints and then take the end panel off so that I can see where to drill the holes. You can clearly see the impression the nail head has left, which is an exact pinpoint for where the drill has to go. And here you can see the jig doing its job, holding all the rails and the back panel in place while I take the end frame off and mark it up, drill the holes, put the dowels in, ready to glue up. Here's another old trick that works quite well. You measure half of the length of the dowel onto the drill you're going to use and put some brightly coloured tape round it. Then you drill down to that and you know you've got the hole which is exactly half the length of the dowel. And here you see me putting the point of the drill exactly into where the nail head made its impression in the wood. Okay, now we've glued the dowels into the holes in the end frame, and now I need to drill corresponding holes into the ends of the rails. You can just about make out the impression of the nail head, so I know exactly where to drill. And here you can see the real value of the jig, because it's holding all the rails perfectly in place, so that when we offer up the end frame, all the dowels line up perfectly with the holes we've just drilled. And it just remains to glue it up and clamp it in place and put the screws in to hold it all together. When all the joints are set, I fix the centre seat support using the same method, and finally glue up the other end frame, so the whole of the frame of the bench is now glued up and finished. And the final bit of construction is to fix the seat slats. I use the same counterbore drill bits so that I can sink the screw heads down inside and cover them up with wood as before.
Takes their score up to 96 off 97 even off 65 balls. Good attempt there, but I don't think in the end it was anywhere near that fielder. Fielding at short third. Nah, gosh, she moved 2 or 3 yards. Maybe an amazing dive, but I think, gosh, it would have been extraordinary. Even if she got to that. But anyway, she didn't. 65 balls gone, 97 of 65. Litchfield 31. Kelly on 45 just now. On ball 16 odds. There was a moment there, just looking at that Georgia always thought it might have gone to hand, but it didn't. And they need things to go to hand at the moment.
They do indeed. I mean, we look back at that drop catch at cover. What a soft catch as well. Feed Litchfield dropped on 5. She's now 31 off 19.
Ishmael is about to bowl again. She's bowled 10 balls, 9 runs so far. It's that sort of talent. We need something to happen here. I mean, because it brings up the 100 in the 100 for the Superchargers. The crowd are really in it, really behind. Kelly and Litchfield, the not-out pair at the moment, doing a terrific job for the home side. Through to the knockout stage, on 5 of 70 balls. Kelly's 45, Litchfield on balls 17
balancing these two out by the looks of it so far. But Claire Nicholas back into the attack with her off spin.
Had chances though. Had a couple of catches down there. Nicholas is into the attack, but Kelly skips down the pitch and flips the ball out towards deep mid wicket. There's three fielders on the leg side boundary. Throw comes in and hits the stumps and done. It's been one of those days for the Welsh Fire where completely a good bit of fielding from the deep hits the stumps and could have cost them an overthrow. Not the case on this occasion. One added to the score. Superchargers 105. The bowling of Nicholas in fact. He's hammering a drive. Now it's worked for Sammy Beaumont to do it with us. He does it well. Good Beaumont. He's a good fielder. Moves well, as you would expect from a former gymnastics champion. Superchargers 107 from 72 balls. Return to 40 from 25.
So it's finished, and all of the screw heads have been covered up by little plugs of wood, and those have all been cut and smoothed down to the level of the surrounding wood. And now it's time to start giving it its finishing coat of colour and varnish. This isn't a medieval piece, so I don't have to use period authentic coatings and polishes and varnishes. I can use modern finishes to try and protect it a bit against the weather. It has two coats of a light brown wood preservative, followed by a coat of clear water shield. And we can see that the finish bench looks fine in a formal garden setting, or even in a quirky flower garden. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video.